එදිනෙදා ඔබේ මුළු සිරුරටම රැකවරණයක්. ස්වදේශී කොම්බ සබන්.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, clear choice. Diplomats asked to submit PCR test results upon arrival or undergo a mandatory test at the airport. Animals' bliss set to end. Human-animal encounters to increase in the future.
Animals who have come out of protected areas have got used to visiting lands that are normally human-dominated.
Public warned that elephants won't give up without a fight.
These are the only animals that will not give up land that they have reclaimed easily.
Filling up. 5 virus treatment centres pass 100 patient mark following spike in arrival infections. Jogging the memory. Media and political parties given a reminder on how to behave during election season. All that and much more coming up on First at 9, this Friday the 5th of June 2020.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9.
නව sunlight sakura. දැන් දිකුකල් පවතින sakura මල් සුවඳින්.
Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammike Kanayaka. Let's start with your local stories. Now, members of the diplomatic community are now requested to submit PCR test reports obtained within 72 hours prior to their departure when they enter Sri Lanka. Any failure to do so will result in them being subjected to a mandatory PCR test at the Bandaranaike International Airport upon arrival. A set of revised instructions on PCR testing and quarantine procedures for the members of the diplomatic corps in Colombo when they enter Sri Lanka have been issued in order to prevent and minimise the risk of the spread of the coronavirus.
According to the revised instructions on PCR testing and quarantine procedures for diplomats entering Sri Lanka, the respective diplomatic missions may inform the Ministry of Foreign Relations by a note verbal the details of the diplomats and their family members who are scheduled for entry or re-entry into Sri Lanka for the diplomatic assignments well in advance in order to obtain the prior approval from the concerned authorities. The members of the diplomatic staff and their family members also need to submit PCR test reports obtained within 72 hours prior to their departure from respective countries. If the members of the diplomatic staff and their family members are unable to provide PCR test reports, they would be subjected to a mandatory PCR test at the Bandaranaike International Airport in Katunayaka. Heads of mission and family members at the official residences. All other arriving diplomatic staff and their family members will have to follow quarantine procedures at a hotel recommended by the government of Sri Lanka if independent or separate residences are not available for a period of 14 days subject to concurrence and supervision of the heads of mission. The diplomatic missions or representations need to inform the Ministry of Foreign Relations once the 14-day home quarantine is completed and submit the second PCR test report done by the mission before the officer resumes duties in the mission, as per the measures taken by the mission to control and prevent the spread of coronavirus. The diplomatic missions or representations have to forward the travel details of the diplomatic staff and their family members at least 48 hours prior to their departure to the Chief of Protocol of the Ministry. The Foreign Ministry further notes that travel by diplomatic officers to Sri Lanka will be approved subject to their concurrence to follow these procedures issued by the Sri Lankan government.
Today is the Poson Poe Day, the day commemorating the arrival of Buddhism to Sri Lanka when Arhat Mahinda delivered the sermon that was to make Sri Lanka the home of Theravada Buddhism. Religious observances were, however, somewhat muted with the low turnout of devotees experienced throughout the country's Buddhist shrines as health and safety protocols kept people at their homes, while a curfew is also in effect. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, in his Poson Poe Day message, said that justice for all can only prevail in a virtuous, disciplined and prosperous society, and that while facing the prevailing pandemic, the country did not deviate from this vision that is built on the heritage of a civilized culture.
The sacred Poson Poya Day is one of the most significant Buddhist holidays in Sri Lanka, marking the arrival of Buddhism to the island in the 3rd century BC. This year, as the country slowly but surely recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic, a marked reduction in the number of devotees visiting temples across the country for religious observances was witnessed. However, those that did were seen engaged in religious rituals while maintaining social distancing protocols, and most others observed still from the safety of their homes. However, the island-wide curfew, social distancing and restrictions of public dining at eateries took its toll on public dansalls, resulting in no sign of the festive scenes usually witnessed on the day. In line with this, TV Derana's Derana Vandana program was worked off at the historic Ruwan Varisaya temple, bringing viewers closer to the events in Anuradhapura and aiding them in their observances while staying home. Blessings were also sought for the country's health and security professionals engaged in combating the COVID-19 threat by members of the Sangha. Meanwhile, in his traditional Poson Poya speech, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said that the teachings of Gautama Buddha have trained people to be mindful of this world and the afterworld and thus be virtuous and civilized. The president added that the Dhamma and the knowledge base passed on by Arahat Mahinda Thera upon his arrival to the island guided Sri Lankans to rise as a proud and dignified nation. He added that the government plans for not only the present but also for the future based on that solid foundation, and even whilst facing the prevailing pandemic, the country did not deviate from the government's vision that is built on that civilized culture that the government inherited, and the journey without this reality is not possible for us as Sri Lankans. In his Poson Day message, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa said that everyone should act on the advice given by the health and security sector for a short while longer to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic and move forward as a united nation. The Prime Minister engaged in religious observances at Carlton House in Tangol, presided over by Senior Lecturer in Pali and Buddhist Studies at the University of Ruhuna, Venerable Koggale Vijayatera.
Now, Sri Lanka has not reported a single community transmission of COVID-19 for over a month. Yet, 5 of the 11 coronavirus treatment centres are housing patients in the excess of 100. The sole contributors to this situation are some of the recent returnees from overseas and the Navy cluster. Meanwhile, the countrywide curfew, which was brought into effect on Wednesday night, will be lifted at 4 a.m. tomorrow, and from then on, the curfew will be imposed from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. until further notice.
Sri Lanka's active COVID-19 cases went up to 932, with the discovery of 4 patients today. From the 48 COVID-19 infections confirmed yesterday, 42 are naval personnel who were at quarantine centres. The Government Information Department says that they were quarantined at Kandakadu, Olubil, Mihintale and Iyakkachi facilities. The rest, meanwhile, are recent returnees from India, Bangladesh and Dubai who were quarantined upon their arrival. All those diagnosed with COVID-19 were sent to relevant treatment centres. As things stand, 5 out of the 11 COVID-19 treatment centres have exceeded the 100-patient mark. They are the National Institute of Infectious Diseases, the Valikanda Base Hospital, the Valisara Navy Hospital, Homagama Base Hospital and the Hambantota General Hospital. In the meantime, a religious program was worked off for coronavirus patients being treated at the Iranavela Treatment Centre in view of the Poson Poya Day. There are 52 patients there under medical observation. Within the last 45 days since the first Navy sailor tested positive for COVID-19, the virus has spread to 844 naval personnel in total. From that, 433 have recovered, with 17 of them leaving hospital today. Meanwhile, as a whole, Sri Lanka has recorded 1,800 coronavirus cases. The epidemiology unit said that 858 of them have left hospital after full recoveries. It leaves a further 932 patients under treatment across 11 COVID-19 treatment centres. Meanwhile, the curfew, which came into effect at 10 p.m. on Wednesday, will continue to be in place until 4 a.m. tomorrow. After tomorrow morning's curfew lift, the curfew will be imposed on a daily basis from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. until further notice. The police have warned that those taken to streets during curfew hours for non-essential matters will be brought to book.
කොරෝනා වෛරසය පැතිරීම වළක්වන්න සබන් යොදා දෑත් සෝදන්න.
An extraordinary Gazette notification containing the Code of Conduct for political parties, independent groups and candidates contesting in the elections has been published. Now, the code is applicable to the period commencing from the date of notice of nomination and to the date of declaration of the result of any election. The Gazette reads, rules and regulations can do little in making the role of political parties more meaningful towards the advancement of the contemporary society, but the political parties have a greater responsibility in increasing a conducive environment to conduct free and fair elections. Now, in the meantime, a set of guidelines for media institutions have also been published in another extraordinary Gazette notification. The Gazette has specified 36 points to be followed by media during the election season. We will see you shortly after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, with a marked absence of a human presence in many parts of the country, or worldwide, I should say, due to countries undergoing coronavirus lockdowns, animals seem to have taken full advantage of this situation. However, with normalcy being restored across the country and people planning to return to daily activities, environmentalists warn of a possible surge in human-animal encounters. Director of the Environment Foundation Limited, Rukshan Jayawardena, says that increased conflicts and encounters can be expected in the foreseeable future as animals tussle with humans for the right to move freely on properties vacated in the past months.
For several months, wildlife world over experienced sheer bliss. No humans in sight as COVID-19 made sure they were confined to their houses. All of a sudden, the daily threat posed on animals by the self-proclaimed most intelligent species in the world was gone, albeit for a while. The bliss the animals indulged in is now coming to an end, as humans are returning to the spaces they temporarily vacated. But the elephants, leopards, and many other creatures who ventured into what for them looked to be abandoned farmlands and various vacant spaces do not know that humans are returning.
Animals who have come out of protected areas where they have little or no contact with humans will be occupying or visiting or have got used to visiting these lands that are normally human dominated, and therefore more conflict can be expected or more confrontation, and that is something that people have to keep in mind. It will be startling for both humans and animals, because animals also would have thought that humans are not coming back into that landscape for a while. But they have no idea about our constraints. They can only understand through trial and error and experience. Whereas if they cross a certain river, they cross a certain stream, they cross a certain footpath, the safety and security they had on one side of that boundary is not found on the other side. But sometimes these boundaries are completely invisible to animals or humans because they are just lines drawn on maps. Protected area on one side, unprotected lands on the other side.
One of the long-running tragic tales of Sri Lanka has been the conflict between the world's largest land mammal, the elephant, and the people. Both sides have suffered heavy casualties, but although elephant numbers have dwindled to several thousands, human numbers continue to grow into millions. So what does the return of people after a hiatus mean for the already strained, uneasy relationship between the two species?
One note about elephants, these are the only animals, the only mammals in Sri Lanka that I know that will not give up land that they have reclaimed easily. And also if you push them too much, they push back. It's not an animal that has grown up. In its evolutionary history, it has not had to worry about any other predator or any other serious threat from another species. Geologically speaking, fairly recently do we share space with them, because elephants have been around long before modern humans started dominating the landscape. So now they have given way to us almost everywhere. The only way forwards for the conservation of the elephant is to yield the landscape to elephants even part of the time during any given year, sometimes at night. But during the year there are months that even agricultural lands should be allowed to be visited by elephants, because they know where to limit their presence and their interaction with human beings.
Over the last week, Sri Lanka lost one of its treasures, a rare black leopard. It was caught in a wire trap set up by villagers in a certain locality in Hatton. Then news came of another leopard being caught in a similar trap. By nature, leopards are elusive animals, preferring to steer well clear of humans. So why are they venturing into human habitat? The answer may lie in the leopard's prey.
Especially where tea estates dominate the landscape, we have an increased level of human-leopard interactions that end in unfortunate incidents where leopards get caught in snares. There are various provisions that govern how and when and why you can kill a wild boar. But if all those are removed, as there has been a push a few years ago, and if those bills are passed through Parliament, you can definitely expect increased human-leopard conflicts, because that will reduce the prey base for leopards, and that will bring leopards increasingly into homestead areas looking for alternate prey. And there lies the beginnings of true conflict between humans and leopards.
Before people return to what's dubbed the new normal, many animals ventured out of their protected sanctuaries and into human habitat. Once they venture outside, are they still protected?
Outside of protected areas where the protected species, their protected status remains the same, protected statutorily, legally, whether it lives inside a national park or whether it lives in a completely unprotected landscape like a mixed farm landscape and settlements with a bit of scrub, none of which is protected, but the animal is protected. But is it really protected? Because there is very low wildlife department presence in such a landscape. There are certain infrastructural, logistical changes that need to happen with the wildlife department. But quite apart from that, a focus change has to happen. If hill country leopards are to be protected, including black leopards, the focus of just trying to conserve and protect what is within protected areas, which are extremely small, that landscape has to have a better presence of the wildlife department. There has to be more outreach programs.
Although the focus has mainly been on leopards in the recent days, it's clear that people should expect more encounters with animals, at least for the foreseeable future.
The wildlife department and forest department needs to do some kind of outreach education programs in this time, because it is an unusual time, and when people go back into areas that they have not occupied, not been in, cleared, not walked through for these 2 months, they will find kind of increased wildlife presence.
Now moving on with other stories, a suspect wanted in connection with a murder in Monaragala was killed in a shootout with the police today. A team of police officers had launched a raid acting on a tip-off received with regard to the suspect's hideout in the area of Etihad in Monaragala. The suspect, however, had opened fire at the police officers, who in response returned fire. The suspect sustained injuries during the encounter and died upon admission to the Sirigala hospital in Monaragala. The police officers have seized a hand grenade, a firearm and a knife which had been in the possession of the suspect. Ratings agency ICRA Lanka reported a slowdown in the country's economic activity in the first quarter of 2020 and predicted a 4.5% contraction in the second quarter of the year amidst the COVID-19 virus. With construction activities stalled during the past months, ICRA says that the ability of some construction companies to withstand the negative effects of the pandemic could depend on factors such as its severity, parent company support, government policies and availability of additional capital buffers.
Ratings agency ICRA Lanka says that with construction companies reeling from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, with projects stalled, it expects disruptions to have some impact on the operating income, profitability and liquidity positions of construction companies in the short term. However, it expects the sector to demonstrate resilience compared with other economic sectors in Sri Lanka based on 4 key reasons. Reason 1 has been stated as an expectation that projects will gradually pick up pace and manage to stay within their original timelines, despite labour shortages experienced as a result of construction labourers returning to their homes in the face of the lockdown. The report says that in spite of possible financial challenges likely to be faced by the government, given the strong legal and contractual protections available for construction contractors, it expects ongoing projects, especially government-funded ones, to recommence operations soon. The expectation of current domestic raw material production levels and inventories to sustain ongoing projects has been cited as its second reason. However, this applies to specific construction company requirements only and not to value-added imports for which no local alternatives exist to fill the gap. The report states that in this backdrop, the government may need to relax restrictions on such items, considering the significance of the industry in the Sri Lankan economy. Reason 3 says that construction companies are largely insulated from the adverse effect of raw material price volatility due to currency depreciation. Steel, a key input for the construction sector, has plummeted amidst weaker global demand, while oil used in producing construction raw material like tar has fallen by almost 50%. The lower prices of the metals and oil are expected to set off the effects of currency depreciation. It adds that although some foreign-funded projects are foreign currency denominated and therefore possess a natural hedge against increasing forex cost risks, most construction projects in Sri Lanka are local currency denominated. The fourth reason has been cited as availability of funding support, with most foreign-funded projects requiring an initial government financial commitment before utilizing foreign funding lines, and some project failures reported due to inadequate initial funding commitments by the government. Projects subject to such arrangements could face challenges. However, ICRA Lanka says that the effect of the four reasons cited can be undermined by deterrents, namely muted inflows in the medium term and a moderation in profitability due to the lockdown.
The US economy unexpectedly added jobs in May after suffering record losses in the prior month, offering the clearest signal yet that the downturn triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic was probably over. The Labour Department's closely watched employment report today also showed the jobless rate falling to 13.3% last month from 14.7% in April, which is a post-World War II high. It came on the heels of surveys showing consumer confidence, manufacturing and services industries stabilising. Economic conditions have significantly improved as businesses reported or reopened rather after shuttering in mid-March to slow the spread of COVID-19. Now, Emirates and Etihad Airways are set to resume some transit flights after the United Arab Emirates lifted a suspension on services where passengers stop off in the country to change planes or for refueling. Dubai's Emirates, one of the world's biggest long-haul airlines, said yesterday that it would operate transit flights to 29 destinations in Asia, Europe and North America by the 15th of June. Abu Dhabi's Etihad, meanwhile, is quoted saying that it would carry transit passengers to 20 cities in Europe, Asia and Australia from the 10th of June. The suspension was lifted late on Wednesday for UAE carriers, more than 2 months after the Gulf Arab state halted all passenger flights in March as it introduced drastic measures to curb the spread of the new coronavirus. We will see you again shortly. Bear with us. Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, the death of George Floyd has brought to the fore systematic racism rampant in the US criminal justice system, with police brutality numbers there being one of the highest in the world. Following the release of video clips showing police officers kneeling on the victim's neck while restraining Floyd for the 10th day straight, protests have erupted not only in the United States but across the world as civil rights movements have galvanized to support the end of such acts.
Protesters took to the streets of America's cities for the 10th straight night last night. Thousands of people in New York, Portland and Philadelphia rallied in mostly peaceful demonstrations, taking a stand against the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man pinned by his neck to the street by a white officer. The gatherings, while boisterous at times, were for the most part orderly, in contrast to several previous nights punctuated by sporadic arson, looting and clashes between protesters and police. The change in mood reflected a determination voiced by many protesters and organizers in recent days to transform outrage over Floyd's death into a renewed civil rights movement seeking reforms to America's criminal justice system. In the nation's capital, a group of protesters congregated near the White House, where construction workers were seen erecting new concrete barriers and fences around the presidential residence. In Detroit, buildings were lit in purple in honor of Floyd. The size and scope of protests have seemed to ebb after prosecutors in Minneapolis on Wednesday elevated murder charges against one police officer jailed last week in Floyd's May 25th death and arrested 3 others accused of aiding and abetting the first. Meanwhile, while the protests have been largely peaceful, vandals and looters have taken advantage of some demonstrations to break into shops and cause mayhem. With businesses still attempting to recover from the economic destruction wrought by COVID-19, business owners have to now contend with facing possible physical destruction of their businesses.
I really was concerned, especially after getting here and seeing this. I'm like, wow, we're lucky because it's like right across the street. I mean, I haven't had income since March. That's how badly I've been hurt. And it seems like this is just prolonging like everything, because it's not going to go back to normal if people keep ransacking everything.
We've been struggling for the last 3 months, and we were ready to start making some money to recover. And now we couldn't afford the destruction anymore. I mean, if something happened, then that's it. We will close for good, forever.
Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense has announced that the country's health officials are preparing to begin human testing of a potential vaccine for the COVID-19 virus. In the meantime, as thousands of protesters continue to gather in large groups around the US, the country's head of the Center for Disease Control has urged protesters to get tested.
For several days, people across the US have taken to the streets to protest against police brutality and racial injustice following the killing of another black man, George Floyd, at the hands of white officers. Director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Robert Redfield, said that protesters in the United States should highly consider getting tested for coronavirus. In the meantime, public transport users in the UK will have to wear face masks on public transportation starting from June 15th. The country's Transport Secretary said that evidence suggests that wearing face coverings offers some, albeit limited, protection against the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Defense is preparing to commence testing of the COVID-19 vaccine on humans. A video released by the ministry yesterday showed. Around 50 volunteers were picked from among ministry staff, according to the head of the country's main military hospital, and were transported to the medical facility in the Moscow region. In the meantime, in an effort to ramp up testing, African states have rolled out a partnership to accelerate COVID-19 testing. The head of the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention said on Twitter, the initiative is led by 3 pillars, mainly test, trace and treat.
Chelsea have agreed a deal to sign Germany striker Timo Werner from Bundesliga's club RB Leipzig. Now, reports say that Werner has a €55 million clause which expired on the 15th of June, and the Premier League club Chelsea had offered the 24-year-old a contract worth £200,000 per week. Werner is the second top scorer in the Bundesliga this season with 25 goals, 4 behind Bayern Munich's Robert Lewandowski. Now, he has made 29 appearances for Germany, scoring 11 times. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.